Widow and son evicted in the rain. Then a veteran and his dog uncovered a shocking secret. Welcome to Tales by Orion. Let's uncover what really happened. What if the one place you felt safe, the sanctuary built from love and memory, was about to be washed away in a storm, not of rain, but of pure, unadulterated greed? For Alara Vance, this wasn't a hypothetical question. It was the cold, hard reality knocking at her door, a door her late husband Mark had installed with his own 2 hands just a year before. The rain had been falling for 3 days straight, a miserable gray curtain that sealed the town of Oakhaven in a damp melancholy that mirrored the one in her own heart. It had been 6 months since Mark's car had skidded on a patch of black ice, 6 months of learning to navigate a world that felt fundamentally tilted on its axis. Her son, 7-year-old Leo, was her anchor, his quiet resilience a constant painful reminder of the man he was growing up to be without. They were surviving, just barely, on the small life insurance policy and Alara's part-time job at the local library, a place of comforting silence and stories that, unlike hers, had neat, tidy endings. Their little blue house, nestled at the end of a sleepy cul-de-sac, wasn't just wood and nails, it was a living scrapbook. Every scuff on the hardwood floor was a memory of Leo learning to ride his tricycle indoors. Every faint pencil mark on the kitchen doorframe, a testament to his slow but steady climb toward boyhood. It was here Mark had sung her to sleep. Here he had built Leo a fortress of pillows on Sunday mornings. It was, in short, everything. Which is why the letter, when it arrived, felt less like a piece of paper and more like a shard of glass in her hand. It was from a company she'd never heard of, Abernathy Properties, and the language was cold, corporate, and utterly devoid of humanity. It spoke of a portfolio acquisition, of a recent review of tenancy agreements. It mentioned a clause, Section 4B, Subsection C, a string of legal jargon that boiled down to a single brutal point. Upon the death of the primary leaseholder, Mark Vance, the lease was subject to immediate termination at the discretion of the new property owner. Discretion, it seemed, was not in Alara's favor. The letter informed her, in the same detached tone one might use to report a quarterly dividend, that she and her son were to vacate the premises within 30 days. 30 days. 4 weeks to dismantle a life, to pack up a ghost, to explain to a 7-year-old boy why they had to leave the only home he had ever known. A man's name was printed at the bottom, a crisp, arrogant signature. Alistair Abernathy, CEO. The name felt heavy, foreign, a harbinger of a kind of cruelty she hadn't known existed. She read the letter again, and then a third time, the words blurring through the tears she refused to let fall. A mistake. It had to be a mistake. Mark had told her the house was theirs, that he'd sorted out a rent-to-own agreement with the previous owner, old Mr. Hemlock. They had a file, thick with receipts and handwritten notes from the kindly old man who had treated them like family. Surely, this Abernathy character, this faceless corporation, couldn't just erase all of that. The rain beat a frantic rhythm on the roof, a drumbeat counting down her final days. From his spot on the rug, Leo looked up from his drawing of a superhero with a dog sidekick. "Is everything okay, Mom?" he asked, his voice small, perceptive. Alara forced a smile that felt like cracking plaster. "Everything's fine, sweetie, just a silly letter." But it wasn't silly, it was a declaration of war, and she felt utterly, terrifyingly, unarmed. She was just a librarian, a widow, a mom. Who was she to fight a CEO? That night, as the storm raged outside, she clutched the cold paper in her hand, the name Abernathy burning into her mind. She didn't know it yet, but this letter was not just an eviction notice. It was a catalyst, the first tremor of an earthquake that would expose a secret buried deep beneath the rain-soaked soil of Oakhaven, a secret that would bring a powerful man to his knees. The fight was coming, and it would be a storm far greater than the one lashing against her windows. The phone call was even worse than the letter. Alara had spent a sleepless night rehearsing what she would say, gathering Mark's file of papers, her hands tracing his familiar scrawl on the margins of receipts. She felt a flicker of hope, a belief that a simple conversation, human to human, could resolve this. This was a miscommunication, that's all. A terrible, bureaucratic miscommunication. She dialed the number for Abernathy Properties, her heart thudding against her ribs like a trapped bird. After navigating a maze of automated menus, a crisp, impersonal voice answered. "Alistair Abernathy's office." Alara took a breath. "My name is Alara Vance. I received a letter regarding the property at 12 Elm Street. I believe there's been a significant misunderstanding. She was transferred twice, each time to someone more dismissive than the last, until finally, a man's voice, slick with impatience, came on the line. Abernathy. There were no pleasantries, no introduction, just the single sharp word. Mr. Abernathy. Ilara began, her voice steadier than she felt. I'm calling about the eviction notice. My late husband, Mark Vance, had an agreement with the previous owner, Mr. Hemlock. We have records, a rent-to-own contract. She was cut off mid-sentence. Ma'am. Abernathy's voice was like gravel rolling over silk, a strange mix of polished and rough. I am well aware of the arrangement with Mr. Hemlock. Unfortunately for you, that arrangement was not legally binding. It was a handshake deal, a gentleman's agreement, and the gentleman in question is no longer with us. My company acquired this portfolio through proper legal channels. The property at 12 Elm Street is now ours, and per the original, legally sound lease agreement your husband signed 5 years ago, which supersedes any folksy sidebar deals, the tenancy is terminated. It's policy. Policy. The word was a brick wall. He said it with such finality, such chilling indifference. But Mr. Abernathy, Ilara pleaded, the desperation she had tried to suppress seeping into her voice. I have a 7-year-old son. We have nowhere to go. It's the middle of autumn. The holidays are coming. Can't you give us more time? 60 days, even? Just until I can figure something out. There was a sigh on the other end of the line, a sound of profound and theatrical boredom. Mrs. Vance, my business is real estate, not charity. The 30-day notice is generous. It is, in fact, the maximum period required by state law. I have plans for that property. Plans that have been in motion for months. Your situation, while unfortunate, is not my concern. The policy is clear. Ilara felt a surge of anger, hot and sharp. Your policy is cruel. This isn't just a property, it's our home. My husband built parts of this home with his own hands. Don't you have any sense of decency? A dry, humorless chuckle echoed down the line. Decency doesn't pay dividends, Mrs. Vance. The world is a tough place. I suggest you spend less time appealing to my better nature and more time packing your boxes. You have 22 days left. Don't make me involve my lawyers. And with that, the line went dead. Ilara stood in her quiet kitchen, the receiver still pressed to her ear, the dial tone a shrill, mocking scream. The hope she had clung to, dissolved, replaced by a cold, terrifying certainty. This man, this Alistair Abernathy, would not be reasoned with. He was a force of nature, like a hurricane or a flood, and she and Leo were directly in his path. Down the street, an old man named Silas was sitting on his porch, watching the rain. His German shepherd, Buster, a noble creature with intelligent amber eyes, lay at his feet, his head on his paws. Silas had seen the frantic way Ilara had run to her mailbox the day before, had seen the slump in her shoulders as she walked back inside. He'd seen the lights on in her house all night. He didn't know the details, but he knew the look of a person whose world had just been shattered. He'd worn that look himself, a long time ago. He watched her little blue house, a silent sentinel, a witness. He didn't know that he and his dog were about to become the most unexpected heroes in a story of greed and corruption. But he felt a pull, a sense of duty that hummed in his bones, a quiet promise to himself that he would not let that woman and her boy face the coming storm alone. The final day arrived not with a roar, but with a quiet, relentless drizzle that clung to the air and seeped into everything. A perfect pathetic fallacy for the end of Ilara's world. The 30 days had evaporated in a blur of frantic phone calls to legal aid societies that were overwhelmed, to social services that had waiting lists months long, to rental agencies that wanted deposits she didn't have. Each conversation was a new door slamming shut in her face. Hope had dwindled to a tiny, flickering ember. And this morning, the rain felt like it was finally extinguishing it. A large white moving truck, emblazoned with a garish, overly friendly logo that felt like a slap in the face, rumbled to a stop in front of her house at precisely 9 o'clock. Moments later, a sleek black sedan pulled up behind it. Alistair Abernathy emerged, holding a large black umbrella, looking impeccable in a tailored suit that seemed to repel the rain and the misery around him. He surveyed the scene, his expression one of smug satisfaction, as if he were a king reclaiming a rebellious province. He didn't approach Ilara. He simply stood by his car, a silent, imposing overseer, and gestured to the two burly movers who climbed out of the truck. "Everything on the curb," he said, his voice carrying easily through the damp air. "I want the property cleared by noon." Alara stood on the porch, her arms wrapped around a shaking Leo, whose face was buried in her coat. "Please," she whispered, though she knew it was useless. "Please just let me finish packing the important things." Abernathy glanced at her, a flicker of annoyance in his eyes. "You've had 30 days, Mrs. Vance. Your failure to manage your time is not my problem." He turned back to the movers. Now, the two men, their faces impassive, walked past her and into the house. The sounds that followed were a symphony of destruction, the careless scrape of furniture across the floorboards Mark had so carefully refinished, the clatter of kitchenware being unceremoniously dumped into cardboard boxes. They worked with a brutal efficiency, devoid of any reverence for the life contained within those walls. A box labeled Leo's Art was dropped, a corner crushing inward. A lampshade, one Alara had picked out with Mark on a sunny Saturday afternoon, was tossed aside, dented and forgotten. Each sound was a physical blow. Alara felt a paralyzing sense of humiliation. Her neighbors peeked through their curtains, their faces a mixture of pity and fear, but no one came out. Abernathy's presence was too intimidating, his power too absolute. Her private grief, her personal failure, was now a public spectacle on the wet pavement of Elm Street. Leo's small body trembled against hers. "Mommy, they're breaking our things," he cried, his voice muffled. "Why are they breaking our things?" "It's okay, baby," she soothed, her own voice choked with unshed tears. "They're just things. We have each other." But they weren't just things. They were memories. They were the last tangible pieces of Mark. The movers brought out a large, hand-carved wooden chest, one of Mark's most prized possessions. It was where he kept his old journals, his rock collection, his blueprints and sketches from his time as a geologist. "Be careful with that," Alara cried out, lunging forward. One of the movers grunted, shoving it toward the growing pile on the curb. "It's all junk, lady." The chest tilted, the lid flying open, and a few items spilled out onto the wet ground. A small polished geode, a bundle of letters tied with twine, a worn leather-bound journal. Abernathy smirked, a cruel thin line. "See? Junk. Get it out of here." Just as Alara felt the last of her strength give way, just as she was about to sink to her knees in the cold, muddy grass, a new presence made itself known. A low, deep growl cut through the rain. Silas and Buster appeared as if summoned by the sheer force of Alara's despair. The old man walked with a deliberate, unhurried pace, his back straight, his gaze fixed on Abernathy. He held no umbrella, letting the cold rain darken the shoulders of his worn canvas jacket. At his side, Buster, the German shepherd, was a picture of controlled menace. The fur on his neck slightly raised, his amber eyes locked on the movers who had just manhandled the wooden chest. The growl rumbled in his chest again, a clear, unambiguous warning. The movers froze, their hands hovering over a box of photo albums. Abernathy turned, his expression of smug satisfaction curdling into one of irritation. "Can I help you?" he snapped, his voice dripping with condescension. "This is a private matter." Silas stopped a few feet away, positioning himself between Abernathy and the heap of Alara's life on the curb. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. There was an authority in his quiet presence that commanded attention. "Doesn't look very private to me," Silas said, his voice calm and steady, yet carrying a weight that cut through the sound of the rain. He nodded toward Alara and Leo, who were huddled on the porch, a portrait of devastation. "Looks to me like you're bullying a woman and her child." Abernathy's face flushed a blotchy red. "I am executing a legal eviction. This is my property. Now if you'll kindly remove yourself and your mutt before I call the police for trespassing." "Go ahead," Silas said, unflinching. "Call them. I'm sure they'd be interested to hear how Abernathy Properties conducts its business. Might make for a good story in the Oak Haven Gazette. Local widow and son thrown out in the rain by corporate magnate. Has a nice ring to it, don't you think?" He let the words hang in the air, a direct challenge. Dramatic irony was at play. The audience knew Silas was more than just a nosy neighbor, but Abernathy saw only an old man, a nuisance. He misjudged the situation entirely. For the first time, Abernathy seemed flustered. His eyes darted from Silas to the curtain-twitching windows of the neighboring houses. The last thing he wanted was negative press, especially now, with his big development project on the horizon. He thrived on an image of sleek, untouchable success, not petty cruelty. "This has nothing to do with you, old man," he sputtered. "It's policy." "Is it also your policy to leave a family's personal belongings out in a storm to be ruined?" Silas countered, gesturing to the rain-soaked boxes. Seems less like policy and more like spite. He then turned his attention to Alara, his expression softening. "Ma'am," he said, his voice gentle. "My house is just down the street. It's warm and it's dry. You and your son are welcome to stay as long as you need. Let's get your most important things out of this rain." Alara looked at him, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and overwhelming gratitude. It was the first act of kindness she had received in a month. She could only nod, speechless. Silas looked at the movers, who were still standing motionless, unnerved by the dog. "You two, carefully, put that wooden chest and those photo albums on my porch, now." To Abernathy's astonishment and fury, the men, looking from the formidable dog to the unwavering old man, complied. They seemed to recognize a different, more fundamental kind of authority than the one Abernathy's money bought. Abernathy was speechless, his face a mask of impotent rage. He had lost control of the narrative, of the very scene he had orchestrated. A quiet, unassuming veteran, and his dog had intervened, and in doing so, had completely shifted the power dynamic. As Silas helped a stunned Alara gather Leo and a few precious bags, Abernathy could only watch, his perfectly planned, triumphant morning crumbling into a public relations nightmare. He had won the house, but in that moment, standing alone in the rain, he had somehow, inexplicably, lost. He didn't know it yet, but this was only the beginning of his loss. The seeds of his downfall had just been carefully carried onto Silas's porch. Silas's house was small but immaculate, a stark contrast to the chaos and ruin Alara had just left behind. It smelled of old books, lemon polish, and faintly of dog. A fire was already crackling in the hearth, casting a warm orange glow over the cozy living room. It was an oasis of peace. For the first few days, Alara moved in a fog of gratitude and shock. She and Leo occupied the small guest room, a space filled with handmade quilts and photographs of a smiling woman Alara assumed was Silas's late wife. Silas was a man of few words, but his actions spoke volumes. He made them soup. He ensured the fire was always lit. He gave Leo small important jobs, like filling Buster's water bowl or helping him sort kindling, tasks that restored a small sense of purpose to the boy's upended world. Leo, who had been withdrawn and silent since the eviction, blossomed under the quiet attention. He and Buster became inseparable. The big German shepherd, so intimidating on the street, was a gentle giant, allowing Leo to bury his face in his thick fur, listening patiently to the boy's whispered secrets. The dog seemed to understand that the child needed a guardian, a steady, warm presence that asked for nothing in return. For Leo, Buster was the superhero's sidekick from his drawings come to life. Alara watched them, a lump forming in her throat. Seeing her son smile again, hearing his tentative laughter as he tossed a worn tennis ball for Buster in the small backyard, was a balm on her raw nerves. Silas gave her space. He never pressed her for details about her situation with Abernathy, never offered unsolicited advice. He simply provided a sanctuary where she could breathe. During the day, while Leo was at school, a normalcy Silas had insisted upon, Alara would sit by the fire, nursing a cup of tea, trying to figure out her next move, but her thoughts were a tangled mess. The humiliation of the eviction was a fresh wound, and Abernathy's cold, dismissive voice echoed in her mind. She felt defeated, small, and powerless. One afternoon, Silas sat down in the armchair opposite her. He didn't speak for a long time, just stared into the fire. Finally, he said, "Lost my wife Helen 10 years ago, cancer. Then my son David, 2 years after that, Afghanistan." He said it so plainly, without a trace of self-pity. It was a statement of fact, a sharing of a map of his own grief. Alara looked up, her own sorrow, feeling suddenly less isolating. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. He nodded, his gaze still on the flames. Grief is a heavy pack to carry, and some people like that Abernathy fella, they like to kick a person when they're down. They see vulnerability as a weakness they can exploit. They think because you're grieving, you're not paying attention. He finally turned to look at her, his eyes clear and direct. But they're wrong. Grief doesn't make you weak. It makes you see things other people miss. It sharpens your vision. You just have to remember how to use it. His words were not a hollow platitude. They were a quiet call to action. He was reminding her that she was more than just a victim. She was a survivor, just like him. She was Mark's wife, Leo's mother. The conversation was a turning point for her spirit. The fog began to lift, replaced by a slow burning ember of resolve. She wasn't just fighting for a house anymore. She was fighting against the casual cruelty of men like Abernathy. She was fighting for the decency Silas had shown her. That evening, determined to start sorting through the few possessions she had managed to save, she turned to the large wooden chest that now sat in the corner of Silas's living room. It was the one thing she had cried out for, the one thing Silas had made the movers save. It was a piece of Mark, and she needed to feel close to him. As she lifted the heavy lid, the familiar scent of old paper and cedarwood filled the air. She didn't know that inside this chest, beneath the sentimental trinkets and old letters, lay a secret Mark had left behind, waiting for her to find it, and a certain German shepherd was about to give her the first clue. The days settled into a new, fragile routine. In the mornings, Alara would walk Leo to school, the crisp autumn air a welcome shock to her system, a daily reminder that the world kept spinning. In the afternoons, she would tackle the heartbreaking task of sorting through the salvaged boxes, each photograph and trinket a bittersweet memory. The large wooden chest, however, remained mostly untouched. It felt too final, too much like sifting through the wreckage of a life that was well and truly over. But Buster, the dog, seemed to disagree. The German shepherd, usually so calm and stoic, developed a peculiar obsession with the chest. Whenever Alara was near it, he would trot over, his tail giving a low, anxious wag. He would nudge the dark wood with his wet nose, whining softly. At first Alara thought he was just seeking attention, or perhaps he smelled the faint lingering scent of Mark. She would pat his head, murmur, "Good boy, Buster," and try to ignore him. But his behavior grew more insistent. He began to paw at one specific corner of the chest, his claws making a soft scratching sound against the varnish. He would look from the chest to Alara, then back again, his intelligent eyes filled with an unmistakable urgency. "What is it, boy?" she asked one afternoon, kneeling beside him. He responded with a soft woof, and nudged a small carved wooden box that was tucked away in the corner he'd been pawing at. It was a simple, unadorned thing, a small cube of oak that Mark had whittled years ago. She'd always assumed it was just one of his many little projects, a place he kept spare screws or guitar picks. She picked it up, shaking it gently. Nothing rattled. It seemed to be a solid block of wood. "It's nothing, Buster," she said, placing it back in the chest. "Just a block of wood." But Buster would not be deterred. The next day, he was at it again, this time more forcefully. He managed to hook a claw under the lid of the chest and pull it open himself, then proceeded to carefully nose the small wooden box out of the corner and push it across the floor toward Silas, who was reading in his armchair. Silas looked down, his brow furrowed. "Well now, what's all this?" He watched as Buster nudged the box again, then looked up at him, expectantly. "He's been obsessed with that thing for days," Alara said, with an exasperated sigh. "I don't know why. It's just a silly box Mark made." Silas, however, didn't dismiss it. He had spent years in reconnaissance, trained to notice things that were out of place, to trust his instincts and the instincts of the animals he worked with. He knew that a dog as intelligent and well-trained as Buster didn't fixate on something for no reason. He picked up the small wooden cube, feeling its weight in his palm. It was heavier than it looked. He ran his thumb over the surface, feeling the smooth, seamless joins. "Mark was a geologist, you said?" Silas asked, his eyes scanning every inch of the box. "Yes, before he took the construction management job to be closer to home," Alara replied. "He loved rocks, maps, the earth. He said you could read stories in the layers of stone. A man who reads stories in stone might also know how to hide one." Silas murmured, more to himself than to her. He turned the box over and over. His experienced fingers traced the grain of the wood, feeling for a hidden latch, a pressure point, a seam that was just slightly off. The suspense began to build in the quiet room, thick and palpable. Alara found herself holding her breath. Buster sat at Silas's feet, panting softly, his gaze fixed on the box, as if he knew its secret was about to be revealed. Then Silas's thumb pressed down on a small, almost invisible knot in the wood. It wasn't a click, but a soft, satisfying tin snick. A hairline crack appeared along one of the edges. It wasn't a solid block of wood after all. It was a puzzle box. A box that Abernathy's men had dismissed as junk, that Alara herself had overlooked, was about to give up its secret. The very secret that would change everything. With a gentle pull, Silas slid the top of the puzzle box open. The air in the room seemed to hold its breath. Alara leaned forward, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Inside, nestled in a bed of faded black velvet, was not a jewel or a sentimental keepsake. It was something far more valuable and far more dangerous. There were 3 items: a small, tightly rolled bundle of papers, a slim silver USB drive, and a single, oddly shaped key. The key was old, iron, and bore the insignia of the Oak Haven Municipal Archives. Silas carefully unrolled the papers. They were geological survey maps of the area, but not the official city versions. These were hand-drawn, annotated with Mark's precise, meticulous script. The maps covered their own small plot of land on Elm Street, and more importantly, the large adjacent swathe of undeveloped land. The very land Alistair Abernathy was planning to turn into his new luxury condominium complex, the Summit at Oak Haven. Mark's notes were dense with technical terms: karst topography, sinkhole clusters, high-risk subsidence zones. Red circles were drawn over several areas, including directly under the foundation of their old house and a large portion of the proposed condo site. A chilling note was scribbled in the margin: entire plateau is a house of cards. A significant seismic event, or even heavy sustained construction, could trigger a catastrophic collapse. City survey is 30 years out of date. They have no idea. A wave of cold dread washed over Alara. This wasn't just about a lease agreement. This was about public safety, about a disaster waiting to happen. Abernathy wasn't just an arrogant landlord. He was a man willing to build a residential complex on dangerously unstable ground. What does it all mean? Alara whispered, her voice trembling. It means, Silas said, his voice grim as he pointed to the maps, that your husband discovered that this entire area is a death trap, and Abernathy is about to build on top of it. He picked up the USB drive. Let's see what else Mark wanted us to find. He plugged the drive into his old reliable laptop. The screen flickered to life, displaying a single password-protected folder. Alara's mind raced. What would Mark's password be? She tried their anniversary, Leo's birthday, her name. Nothing worked. Defeated, she slumped back. Then she looked at the maps again, at the scientific terms. She remembered a phrase Mark used to say, a little joke between them whenever he was looking at his rock samples. The earth never lies, she typed. The folder opened. It was a treasure trove of evidence. There were scanned copies of soil sample reports from an independent lab, showing severe ground instability. There was a detailed journal, a log of Mark's findings, his growing alarm, and his attempts to bring this to the attention of the authorities. The last entry was dated 2 days before his death. Spoke to a junior executive at Abernathy Properties today, it read. The company that just bought the Hemlock portfolio. I sent them my preliminary findings. The man on the phone, a Mr. Connors, was very dismissive. Said their own surveyors had cleared the land. He told me to stop making waves. Something feels wrong. They're moving too fast. I'm going to the municipal archives tomorrow to pull the original land grants. I have a key. I need to know what they're hiding. He never made it to the archives. The key lay on the table, a silent testament to his final, unfinished mission. And then the most damning evidence of all, a subfolder labeled correspondence. Inside was a single, saved email chain. It was between Abernathy and the junior executive, Connors, sent the day after Mark's call. Connors had forwarded a summary of Mark's warning. Abernathy's reply was a single, chilling line. Bury it. This geologist is a nobody. He's a tenant in a property we're about to flip. Get rid of him. We break ground in 6 months, with or without his warnings. Get rid of him. The words hung in the air, sinister and cold. They hadn't meant to kill him, surely, but they had meant to silence him, to ruin him, to evict him and discredit him. His death was just a convenient accident for them. Alara felt a white-hot rage burn away her grief and fear. This was for Mark. He hadn't just died in an accident. He had died trying to stop this, trying to protect people. And Alistair Abernathy had callously swept his life's work, his very legacy, under the rug for profit. She looked at Silas, her eyes blazing with a newfound fire. He knew, she said, her voice low and dangerous. He knew all along. Silas nodded, his face set like stone. Yes, he said, and now so do we. The discovery of Mark's hidden evidence transformed the quiet, somber atmosphere in Silas's house into a clandestine headquarters. The despair that had clung to Alara like a shroud was burned away by a righteous fury. She was no longer a victim to be pitied. She was the custodian of her husband's legacy, a warrior armed with the truth. Her quiet dignity now had a sharp, steely edge. The objective was no longer just survival. It was justice. We can't just go to the police, Silas stated, his strategic mind, honed by years of military planning, clicking into gear. Not yet. Abernathy is a big man in this town. He has money, lawyers, connections. He buried this once. He'll try to bury it again. He'll paint you as a bitter, vengeful tenant. We need to choose our battlefield. We need to make this public. So public he can't possibly control the narrative. He tapped a finger on the newspaper lying on the coffee table. There was a glossy, full-page ad for the summit at Oakhaven, featuring a beaming photo of Alistair Abernathy. The ad announced a major press conference and launch event in 2 weeks' time at the most exclusive hotel in the city. It was for potential investors and the media, a grand unveiling of his supposed masterpiece. "This is it," Silas said, a glint in his eye. "This is our battlefield. He's handing us a stage and an audience. We're going to give them a show they'll never forget." The plan began to take shape. It was audacious, risky, and required perfect execution. First, they needed allies. Silas reached out to his network, the quiet, formidable web of veterans who looked out for their own. He made a call to a man named Frank, a former Army signals intelligence specialist who now ran a small private IT security firm. Frank owed Silas a favor. Within hours, he had securely duplicated the contents of the USB drive and authenticated the email chain, creating an untraceable digital package of evidence. Next, Alara, using the key Mark had left behind, went to the Oakhaven Municipal Archives. Walking through the dusty, silent halls, she felt Mark's presence beside her. She found the old land grants he had been searching for. Buried in the fine print was a forgotten covenant from the 1920s, stating that the land was deeded to the city, with the express restriction that it could never be used for heavy residential construction due to unstable subsoil, a fact conveniently omitted from modern zoning maps. It was the missing piece, the legal linchpin that proved Abernathy hadn't just ignored a warning, he'd actively circumvented a century-old legal restriction. The final piece of the puzzle was the media. Silas knew a simple press release wouldn't be enough. They needed a bulldog, an investigative journalist who smelled blood in the water and wouldn't be intimidated by Abernathy's lawyers. He found her in Sarah Jenkins, a young, ambitious reporter for a major city news channel, known for breaking a story about corruption in the city council last year. They met in a quiet diner. Alara, calm and composed, laid out the story, presenting the maps, the journal, the emails. Sarah's eyes widened as the scale of the deception became clear. This wasn't just a local story. It was a bombshell of corporate fraud and public endangerment. "He's having a press conference in 2 weeks, Alara said, her voice steady. "We want you to be there. We're going to confront him publicly." Sarah leaned forward, her recorder already on. "Tell me everything." For the next 2 weeks, they prepared for battle. Alara read and reread Mark's journal, absorbing his findings, his language, until she could speak about karst topography, as if she were a geologist herself. She was no longer just his widow, she was his voice. Silas coached her, running through potential questions, Abernathy's likely reactions, teaching her how to remain calm, to use silence as a weapon, to deliver the final blow with precision, not anger. The pace was frenetic, the tension mounting with each passing day. Alara, Silas, Frank, and Sarah were a small, unlikely team, bound by a common purpose, to expose Alistair Abernathy and honor the man he had tried to erase. The night before the press conference, Alara stood by the window, looking out at the quiet street. She thought of the woman who had stood on her porch in the rain, helpless and humiliated. She was gone. In her place was a woman who knew her own strength, a woman ready to walk into the lion's den and tear it apart from the inside. The ballroom of the Grand Excelsior Hotel was a monument to opulence and ego. Crystal chandeliers dripped from the ceiling, casting a golden light on the impeccably dressed crowd of investors, city officials, and media personalities. Waiters moved silently through the room, with trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres. At the front of the room, on a large stage, a massive screen displayed a rotating series of architectural renderings of the summit at Oakhaven. Gleaming towers of glass and steel, set against a perfect photoshopped sunset. The air was thick with the scent of money and mutual congratulation. At the center of it all was Alistair Abernathy, radiating smug confidence. He moved through the crowd, shaking hands, clapping backs, his laughter a little too loud, his smile a little too wide. He was the king in his court, the master of his universe, completely unaware that his world was about to be shattered. Alara and Silas entered through a side door, their presence going unnoticed in the sea of expensive suits. Alara wore a simple dark blue dress, a stark contrast to the glitter around her. She was not there to impress, she was there to incinerate. Silas, in his best blazer, looked like what he was, a man of quiet, unshakable integrity. They took seats in the back row, Sarah Jenkins and her cameraman positioned discreetly nearby. The lights dimmed. A promotional video played, filled with soaring music and testimonials about Abernathy's vision and commitment to excellence. Then Abernathy himself took the stage to a round of enthusiastic applause. He launched into his speech, a polished monologue about luxury, progress, and the bright future of Oakhaven. He was charismatic, persuasive, and utterly fraudulent. Ilara watched him, her heart a steady, cold drum. She felt no fear, only a profound, chilling focus. And now, Abernathy concluded, beaming, I'd be happy to take a few questions from our friends in the media. A few softball questions were asked and answered. Then Sarah Jenkins gave Ilara a subtle nod. It was time. Ilara stood up, a spotlight operator. Seeing her in the back, swung a beam in her direction. A murmur went through the room. She was not a recognized member of the press. Abernathy squinted, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face as he recognized her. I believe this is a press-only Q&A, he said dismissively. If you have a tenant issue, you can call my office. His arrogance was his first mistake. I'm not here as a tenant, Mr. Abernathy, Ilara said, her voice clear and amplified by the microphone a technician had handed her. It didn't tremble. It was as solid as bedrock. I'm here as the wife of Mark Vance. The name hung in the air. Abernathy's smile tightened. He had no idea what was coming. My husband was a geologist, Ilara continued, her gaze locked on his, and he left me a question for you. It's about the land your beautiful summit is going to be built on. Can you please share with your investors the results of the independent geological survey and soil analysis conducted by Mark Vance, the survey you received and acknowledged just days before his death? Panic flared in Abernathy's eyes. His face, which had been ruddy with self-satisfaction, began to pale. I have no idea what you're talking about, he stammered. Our land has been fully vetted by the best surveyors in the business. This woman is clearly confused, likely distraught. Am I? Ilara said, her voice cutting through his bluster. She nodded to Silas. In the back of the room, Frank, the IT specialist, tapped a key on his laptop. The slick architectural renderings on the giant screen behind Abernathy vanished. They were replaced by Mark's hand-drawn maps, the red circles glowing like warning lights. The room gasped. Mark's meticulous notes on sinkholes and subsidence zones were magnified for all to see. Then perhaps you can explain these, Mr. Abernathy. Ilara's voice rang out. These are my husband's maps. Frank tapped another key. The screen changed again, now displaying the scanned email from Abernathy to his subordinate. The words "bury it" and "get rid of him" were projected 10 feet high behind the man who wrote them. The silence in the room was absolute, a crushing weight. Every eye was on Abernathy, who stood frozen on the stage, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. He was exposed, cornered, and utterly destroyed. Not by a rival corporation or a government investigation, but by the quiet, underestimated widow he had tried to crush. The spotlight was on him, but all the power in the room now belonged to the woman in the simple blue dress. The trap had been sprung. The aftermath was immediate and catastrophic for Alistair Abernathy. The moment the incriminating email flashed on the screen, the room erupted. Sarah Jenkins's camera was rolling, capturing every second of Abernathy's public implosion. His panicked, darting eyes, the beads of sweat on his forehead, his stammering attempts to dismiss the evidence as a fabrication. But the damage was done. The investors, men and women who dealt in risk assessment, saw the truth not just in the documents, but in Abernathy's terrified expression. They began to murmur, then to stand, their faces grim. They were not just witnessing corporate fraud, they were witnessing the potential obliteration of their capital. The story didn't just shake the city. It became a national headline, The Widow's Revenge, how a grieving wife and a veteran exposed a multi-million-dollar deception. Sarah Jenkins's report, featuring the dramatic footage from the press conference, went viral. It was a perfect narrative, the grieving but resilient protagonist, the arrogant, villainous CEO, and the shocking, last-minute reveal. The public outcry was deafening. The city mayor's office, which had championed Abernathy's project, was inundated with furious calls. Within 24 hours, the district attorney announced a full-scale criminal investigation into Abernathy properties for fraud, conspiracy, and reckless endangerment. Alistair Abernathy was arrested not in his gleaming office, but at his gated mansion, a humiliating perp walk for the man who believed he was above consequences. His company collapsed, like the unstable ground it had planned to build on. Investors sued, contractors pulled out, and the summit at Oakhaven became a symbol of corporate greed and corruption. The legal proceedings were swift, faced with Mark's irrefutable evidence and the testimony of the junior executive who quickly turned state's evidence to save himself. Abernathy was convicted. The judge, citing his callous disregard for human life and flagrant deception, sentenced him to a lengthy prison term. For Alara, vindication was not a loud celebratory moment, but a quiet, profound sense of peace. The legal battles resulted in a massive settlement from the now defunct Abernathy Properties insurance and assets. It wasn't just compensation for her eviction, it was an acknowledgement of the value of Mark's work and the danger he had tried to avert. It was more money than she and Mark had ever dreamed of, enough to secure her and Leo's future completely. She didn't buy a mansion or a fancy car. Instead, she bought a modest, lovely house with a big backyard in a quiet, stable neighborhood. Then she did something for Mark. She used a significant portion of the settlement to establish the Mark Vance Foundation for Ethical Development, a nonprofit dedicated to providing independent geological assessments for community projects and advocating for stronger public safety regulations in construction. Her husband's name would now be associated not with victimhood, but with integrity and protection. Silas and Buster remained a constant presence in their lives. The bond forged in crisis had become a deep, familial friendship. Silas was the grandfather Leo had never had, teaching him how to fish, how to identify constellations, and how to treat everyone with dignity. One sunny afternoon, months later, Ilara, Leo, and Silas stood in the backyard of their new home. Leo was throwing a ball for Buster, his laughter echoing in the clear air. It was a scene of perfect, hard-won normalcy. Ilara looked at Silas, her heart full of a gratitude that words could never fully express. "He would be so proud, Ilara," Silas said softly, nodding toward Leo. "Proud of both of you." Ilara smiled, a genuine, untroubled smile. "He would be proud of you too, Silas. We couldn't have done it without you." The story of the widow and the veteran became a local legend in Oakhaven, a cautionary tale about hubris and a testament to courage. It served as a powerful reminder that true strength isn't about power or wealth, but about the quiet resolve to do what is right, even when you feel small and alone. So the next time you see someone being dismissed, underestimated, or pushed aside, remember Ilara Vance. Remember the quiet dignity that concealed a warrior spirit. Remember Silas, the veteran who saw injustice and refused to look away. And remember Buster, the dog who sensed a secret hidden in a simple wooden box. Because you never know what truths lie just beneath the surface, waiting for a little courage, a little kindness, and maybe a very good dog to bring them into the light. Justice isn't always loud, but when it arrives, its silence can be the most powerful sound in the world.